Welcome to the webinar, The Truth of Digital Content Transformation and Conversion. Next slide, please. My name is Marianne Kalahana. I am the Director of Marketing at RSI Content Solutions, and I will be moderating today's program. With me today is Linda Marone from Data Conversion Laboratory. Today's agenda, we're going to have some background information on our webinar sponsors, a quick online poll, an introduction to today's panelists. I'll save time at the end to answer any questions you have. And please note that you may submit questions at any time during the webinar by typing in the questions box in the GoToWebinar dialog box. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to that recording in a separate email after today's show. Next slide, please. DCL stands for Data Conversion Laboratory. DCL is a leader in organizing, converting, and moving content to modern formats for wide access and new revenue streams. With expertise across many industries, DCL's proprietary technology, matched with US-based project management teams, solve clients' complex conversion challenges securely, accurately, and on time. DCL started in 1981 and continues to future-proof content for government, publishers, nonprofits, and a variety of other verticals. Next slide, please. DCL services help refine organizations' document conversion strategy, identify document redundancy, extract metadata, and transform legacy and future documents for real needs today and moving into the future. RSI Content Solutions started in 2000 as a consulting company. We helped publishers with XML and content management related technologies. Today, we are a software company that serves more than 150 customers. We are proud of our customer success and are thrilled to receive industry recognition for the work we've done over the years. RSuite CMS is RSI's enterprise content management system designed specifically for publishers. RSuite CMS is used to store, manage, edit, and deliver content. In 2006, the first version of RSuite CMS was released. And today, RSuite CMS serves a number of publishing verticals, including STM publishers, educational publishers, scholarly publishers, religious publishers, and many more. Some of the world's leading publishers use RSuite CMS, and some publishers you might not be as familiar with use the system as well. So today, I am thrilled to have here with me two leading publishing software consultants, Michael Edson and John Corkery from the DEDI Group. Both have spent their careers serving the information and publishing software industry. DEDI Group works with all publishing and information services verticals, including education, legal, magazine, STM, scholarly, society, and trade. So welcome, Mike and John. Before we begin, we're going to start with a quick poll that we'd like everyone to take a second and just answer. We're looking to gauge who here among us uses a tablet device for work. So you can go ahead and just select yes or no and then submit. And in a moment, I will close the poll. I will share the results. And Mike and John are going to take us away. We have about 80% of the people voted, so I'm going to keep it up just for a couple more seconds. John and Mike have collected some fascinating data around tablet adoption. So this is quite relevant. All right, I'm going to close the poll now, and I'm going to share the results. So, do you use a tablet device for work? 36% of you said yes, you do, and 64% said no, you do not use a tablet device for work. All right, with that, Mike, John, welcome.
Thanks, Marianne.
Thanks, Marianne.
And thanks for having us out here on this topic, which we spent a lot of time working in. So, first of all, do you want to talk about Deddy Group?
Sure. Deddy Group is we're a publishing technology consulting firm. We work with publishers around the questions about digital products and digital conversion, and we help answer those questions around people, process, and technology, not just technology perspective or process perspective. We work in a variety of different publishing verticals, from magazines to books and K-12, higher ed. And we primarily recently have been working with publishers to help diagnose their current state and to give them a realistic picture, not just of where they stand with respect to their own publishing programs, but where they stand with regard to the market space from a best practices and a technology standpoint. We advise publishers around the ways to implement new changes. This is basically what we do. So what we'd like to do is we'd like to start talking about the way tablets have been adopted in the, or are being adopted in the market space. It's pretty evident that most of the people here are not currently using tablets, or at least 2/3 of you are not using tablets in your work. But the indication is that many corporations are adopting tablets in a big way in the market space. This has sort of an impact on us from the standpoint that we need to start thinking about different sources for our content and different sorts of revenue streams. This is just a little infographic about what is predicted from a website called Vertic.com. They advise companies on how to best implement tablet devices in companies. This is just another infographic that indicates what is expected in the next 3 years as far as tablet adoption is concerned. The reason that we focused on tablets is because we've noticed in our practice that tablets and these types of devices, these mobile devices, have a tendency to give publishers the most difficulty at this time. We've noticed that most publishers have pretty much answered the, sort of the ebook thing for themselves fairly well, but it's our contention that, with many more devices coming out and many more different types of means to get into digital, different types of content streams and different types of revenue streams for publishers, it makes a great deal of sense for publishers to start thinking just outside of the publishing realm, and not as the ebook being the final format, but one of the many formats that are going to be available in the coming years. So,
right. Thanks, John. So, just a little market information. So now we're going to switch to the topic at hand, which is related in a few ways. Excuse me. So we have a few questions that we tend to ask ourselves when we're working with clients, and we encourage clients to ask themselves at any time. So it'll be interesting to hear any feedback you might have on these. But we think these are some interesting questions. Some of them you may actually be asking already or know the answers to, but possibly some you haven't. So first off, for a company or organization, do you have a strong outside perspective? That's something that companies who've been working on their own technology for a long time sometimes have less of an outside perspective of what's going on in the market, and even going to conferences and so forth it can still be difficult to form an outside perspective. But we think it's important today to do that because of the changes that are happening in the industry and changes that are happening fairly rapidly.
That's right. We've actually found that most of the industry conferences are not really completely getting at the availability of technology players in the industry, primarily because we've got a great deal of convergence happening. Media and different spaces are starting to spill over into the publishing spaces, and publishers need to be aware of that.
How do your internal capabilities match your plans? Also a very important question that businesses need to ask themselves. So, I mean, depending on what you're trying to do with technology, do you have the technical capability in-house? Do you need support from an outside consultant? Or will your vendor be able to provide the capabilities that you need? So that can be from project management capabilities to technical or semi-technical skills. And we just want to throw that one out there. Another one is, do you have an digital strategy? Many companies do, but many do not as well. And we think that any plans related to content transformation or conversion are best served by understanding your digital strategy as a whole, which can include your distribution channels and various other efforts in the company to produce content in different forms.
And we found that clients best benefit from having cross-functional teams look at this question.
When was the last time you did a formal analysis of your current state? Do you have a full understanding of where you are from a number of different angles? How do they all fit together? So, what is the state of your current technology, but also what is the state of your current process? Your people, as far as their ability, whether they follow best practices today or not. These are all very important questions in determining the most effective direction for your company. Do you have a formal content technology program in place? At this time, many companies are forming or have formed a program for the year or for the next few years. And the question of how formal is that program is a good one because you do want to go and whether it's up to date and current as well. Is your program tied to direct business value? Can you tie could you say in a 3-minute elevator pitch whether your program is to the senior executive, for example, whether your program has, how it is going to affect change in the business? We think it's important to always tie back.
How that's tied to profitability.
Business value.
Exactly.
Are you about to initiate a vendor selection process? There's just as a state of, actually, at this time, many companies are doing that as well. That's a question that we ask when we walk into a company. Do you own technology that has yet to be implemented? These last few questions are much more specific. We do find a lot of companies have technology that they have bought that they are trying to find the best way to implement.
That's right. And the last two questions are basically pointed at many clients that we've seen that just sort of use anecdotal evidence and then sort of shoot from the hip when they're making a vendor selection about something that they think that they need. And one of the things that we found is that clients don't always know exactly what they need, and they haven't always as thoroughly done their homework as they perhaps should have when they're making such an expensive or an important decision around their business.
And last question, are you still working on a 2012 implementation? Are you starting fresh, or are you, do you still have implementations underway?
Are they working on time?
Right.
Are they on schedule?
Anyway, so we thought those are all interesting questions to ask yourself, or to be aware of your current organization, what its capabilities are, and where you are, and what you might need to do to be working in the most efficient or effective level possible. All right, speaking of possible, what is possible today? Just a few bullets on what we see out there anyway, as far as transformation and conversion of content. Sorry. Transformations are straightforward, actually, as long as formats are standard and structured. So we tend to say structured instead of XML, which can be a loaded word in a lot of cases. But basically, content can move from one format to another very quickly, whether it's an EPUB or HTML or an app, what an app needs to print formats as well, as long as the formats are what we call structured, which is not necessarily XML, but something that can transform to and from XML easily.
Right.
So we think that the actual transformations themselves are things that can be built, usually with an outside vendor who's an expert in the area.
But it's important to make sure that the content model really very accurately, or as close to accurately as possible, fits your content.
Right. And by the way, we're keeping this at a somewhat high level. We'll be happy to answer more detailed questions if you want to ask them through the...
Yeah, we'll have Q&A at the end, or you can certainly email us.
Right. So a key issue, if transformations are fairly straightforward, they can be done effectively, provided the formats are structured and well-defined and consistent. So the key issue for content producers is getting both their new and their old content into a starting structured form. So this is one of the key issues to overcome, and one of the key things that we advise our clients on how to do this, because it's not necessarily easy to do either, to convert legacy content into a form that is usable and reusable, or to, as you're producing new content, to maintain it in a structured form.
And having a strategy that begins with the end in mind is obviously, the best way to go with this. But a lot of publishers don't oftentimes know where to begin on something like this.
Many content delivery formats are now XML, which is great. Many are also XHTML based, which is in fact, it is XML and it is HTML for the web. But MS Office formats are all XML at this point. Web formats obviously can be XHTML or HTML, which is also XML compliant, or can be. And then app formats also. Apps tend to be able to use and display XHTML very well. So there's a lot of options now. EPUB also can be opened up to, and it is also an XHTML-based form. So there's a lot of options now, and those are all structured formats. They're also however, the format itself is not necessarily the most important thing, at least for formats that you actually do work in, such as Word, Microsoft Word. while it is a structured format, you need to adopt best practices in order to use it effectively as a structured format. So also there continue to be new XML standards available and coming out in the last year or so. There's been, for example, data for publishers. There's a new format from ID Alliance, primarily for magazines, but also potentially available for books.
That's PSV.
Called PSV. So if you haven't looked around at standards in a while, you may want to do that as you're entering into any new programs.
And it's it's not. I think the old approach used to be, let's get the kitchen sink DTD, and then we won't have to worry about anything. I think current thinking is more along the lines of keeping things streamlined and more appropriate to the particular content that we're working with, as opposed to trying to fit every particular piece of content that we have on our shelf into an Uber format. That seems to be a new approach.
And also, there are a lot of frameworks now that come with standards, that come along with standards that provide for fairly easy, at least basic transformations to formats that you may wish to have, such as HTML or EPUB.
Would that be in the case of DITA, Mike?
Yeah. Okay, but one thing that can be certain, Adobe is not expected to provide a user-friendly structuring capability anytime soon. Just don't expect it. While they have an official capability to structure content in InDesign, for example, and actually primarily I am talking about the print technologies here. And if that's going to be part of your ecosystem, you've got to, we have to find a way to structure content in Adobe InDesign as the preeminent composition tool.
Especially clients who have highly designed content. InDesign is probably the primary tool being used these days.
Although there are new workflows actually that are people are experimenting with that such as using HTML5 and CSS3.
Right.
So we will have to see what happens. So there's a lot of change going on in the industry right now.
Bill Kasdorf is experimenting.
But the result of this is if you want to maintain structure and the ability to pour content easily into Adobe or pull it out of Adobe and maintain it while you're doing your work as structured content, a supporting vendor is required, we think, in most cases. We don't think there's, this is kind of a specialized skill to find to provide the best practices and the supporting technologies to make that happen.
Nor does it usually make sense to pull this kind of stuff in-house unless you've got, you've got a pretty good need or you're a publisher of fairly good size.
Okay, and then just finally, I think this is pretty obvious. Content management is difficult. Content management, large implementations to maintain your content are difficult projects. But the technologies advance every year, and if you haven't looked around in a while, it might be a good time to do so. So just a few items on the possibilities today. We have a colorful slide on technology strategy as opposed to business strategy, and we like to make that distinction. But this is kind of an XML-centric version of the universe that you may have seen going back to 1998 if you have been following things or earlier. It's a variation on the classic star diagram. But basically, as content is structured, XML is essentially an interesting intermediary, that can be used to provide content in all of these different forms. So web, apps, print, ebook, PDF, or other, or things that may be coming up, such as EPUB 3, or which is sort of an early adoption stage. So this is a good technology and typical technology strategy.
They're forming licensing agreements with places like insurance companies or retailers or things of that nature. They are out there, and there are new hybrid people who are coming into the publishing industry from outside of our industry, from media, from television and places like that, that are interested in helping publishers to exploit these new revenue streams. But it really requires a well thought out plan around how you create your content, and a very well thought out plan about how your content is being converted and into what formats you're doing that, and what your content model should look like for that content.
And in fact, some of the folks on the call might in fact be those companies who are interested in content that publishers have, but perhaps that content is locked up and needs to be put in a structured form, so your company can actually work with it and display it along with your products, or as a marketing vehicle for promoting your brand. So that there's a lot, and one of the big issues there is, we find that just knowing what from those types of companies, what formats are appropriate for how you do things, and how to communicate with the publisher to determine what is an appropriate stream, automated stream of content, ideally, is an important component of all this.
Yeah, a lot of these license opportunities are really very much, push and pull type of semi-automated or automated opportunities to either grant access or just push access to content in various ways.
All right. Moving along, so getting structure where you want it. So there's a number of places where structure can be applied to content. So, in fact, I guess I've got them all here. Creations, or in the creation, work in progress, so you can structure at the manuscript phase, in the layout phase, whether that is print or other. Or after the fact, after you're complete, or at the end part of your content development. There's advantages to each of those, but there are some advantages that also actually cross with being effective anyway. For example, in these, as you go earlier. So many writers and so forth aren't going to be, still today, are not going to be, unless they're possibly sort of the younger folks, but many writers today
technical in nature,
right? But are not going to be structuring their manuscript using styles and other techniques, for example, in Word, unless they are using maybe an HTML-based editor to develop their content, and many people won't be doing that for some time.
And much of this stuff doesn't fall into the technology area per se. It's more up in the people and training and best practices area and workflow process area.
Right. But if content is structured in the manuscript phase, it has great benefits in the layout phase, because the design effort is reduced significantly. Actually, and I would clarify that by saying most of the design drudgery work is reduced.
Right, not the creative work.
Yeah, so it allows designers to focus on the creativity, as long as they understand how to work with this type of content. So
it does require training.
Right. But it allows, for example, designers to have content come in and apply, let's say in InDesign, apply styles in a standardized way across all the elements that have the right, or I should say all of the text paragraphs, for example, that have the right style associated with them, all at once, and to make changes after the fact rather than custom designing every little piece. So there's advantages in the development of best practices that go well beyond what you might want to do when you with your content after it's created.
Right.
But of course, many companies go with an after-the-fact approach, where a magazine will be complete, for example, or a book or any type of printed content, and that will be sent to a conversion vendor for turnaround. Out of sight, out of mind, right? But then there's also the big question of legacy content. So there's creation of new content, and then there's legacy content. Legacy content is typically done with a vendor conversion, and it's a pretty standard project today, although there are varying levels of quality associated with that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. Anything else to say down here?
Nope.
Okay. Getting content into structured form. Just some things to think about as far as content creation goes. Make sure that to your objective, and I would relate it back to business value within that objective, and defining the structures that you need at different points in the process, and what are the techniques that people need to use within that within your environment to maintain the structure. Technology change is going to be a piece of implementing a content creation capability,
right?
That uses structuring. There's the use of best practices, which, as we said, cut across both the best way to produce content today, the most efficient way to produce content, and the most efficient way to produce structured content, right? In most cases.
I think that in the past there was sort of a concern about technology or adopting certain processes that you were going to be painting yourself into a corner, or you were going to find yourself orphaned in your process after a while. I don't necessarily feel that the practices that we're talking about here are of that ilk at this time. I think that technological changes are going to come along, but I think that the way that we've been approaching structure, particularly in the last couple of years, is really something that's going to be easy to adapt to the upcoming and the new technologies that are going to be available in the market. So I think that where in the past it was okay to worry about, perhaps orphaning yourself with a process, it's not necessarily the case anymore. I think a greater danger these days is perhaps tying yourself into one proprietary format, that's going to potentially become orphaned. That's probably more of a danger or a risk in the marketplace at this point.
Right. And then don't forget process change. Anytime you are going to adapt your content creation into providing structuring at some point in that process is going to require some process change. The least amount of process change is doing it after the fact with a straight conversion, but there are benefits to doing it further upstream in the process, as I said. And then secondly, conversion's a much different type of project. There's a few things that are very important and we think people or companies need to do, and they need to, of course, again, define your objective, define the structure. It is not good enough to tell a conversion vendor that you want XML.
Or allow the conversion vendor to tell you what you need.
We really advocate that organizations take some kind of ownership of the structure, and ownership doesn't necessarily mean you create your own format, but that you are aware enough, right, where you have the capability, or you hire an independent vendor or consultant to do this, to provide that for you, but to actually understand what you're getting in the marketplace.
Some vendors will collaborate with you around what type of format you need, and they do have the expertise to be able to help you there, especially if you have an in-house content model or a content approach that you've taken. involved. We're going to have to sort of reconvert the base level format, or we're going to have to start from scratch, and that's going to be X number of dollars. So it really always helps to begin with the objective to try and capture enough budget within your organization to be able to convert to a format that's going to be perhaps a little more expensive, but a higher quality conversion house is probably going to steer you more in this direction, because it's going to give you more longevity to your files. And your backlist is really your legacy as far as being a publisher is concerned.
Right. I don't know. We see this too often in the marketplace, where the XML format that's being delivered is sort of unknown, unmanaged, and it's something to be aware of. Defining the quality requirements is important as well, and figuring out how you're going to know and provide an effort level yourself in order to assure that the quality is being achieved, particularly for large efforts.
Absolutely. And you're going to be looking for a conversion vendor who's going to provide you with project management you can readily communicate with in your own time, your own work hours, and somebody who is going to, communicate with you in a rational and effective way. We've heard some horror stories.
Right. Rather than having to go through other people who go through
right.
other people who go through
who follow
anyway,
the chain. Yes.
Essentially we advocate for a high quality process here for conversion and the ability to get high value content, because once it's converted, it has a lot of opportunities associated with it. So moving on, though, transformation automation. Here's just a few, I guess, recaps of things that we do like to talk about. Keep your options open through format ownership. In any case, whether it's conversion or a transformation automation.
So you might want to explain what we mean by transformation automation a little bit.
Sure. So transformation automation, I guess I could just say transformation, but essentially it's providing automation through some kind of software process. That could be XSLT or other, scripting type technologies, but most likely XSLT, I would say. In order to move content from one format to another, there might be other components to that, but essentially it's a company or an organization may not be 100% conversion, and maybe
sometimes it's
semi-automation.
Yeah.
80%. It still saves the organization a lot of drudgery work, right? That typically is not or potentially has not been budgeted for.
And this usually does best work in an integrated workflow and content management approach. We don't know too many clients who are running their transforms outside of the content management system, but
yeah, we do. But essentially, they're optimally integrated into workflow and content management.
Right.
And I should also say metadata management as well, which can be title management systems or other types of metadata management. And one of the big things we keep coming back to is in any kind of software or development or transformation or some kind of automation project, successful projects are multidimensional. They take into account the people part of the equation, the idea that there's a process change, there's a change process, and if your company hasn't had to change in a long time, it's important to keep that in account when you're actually budgeting, when you're actually planning out the project, right, and so forth. So when you do your deployment, there's potentially a transition phase that follows, where there's some higher level support, as well as there could be major changes people are expected to make.
People are open to change. It's just the way you go about doing it. We found that if you're trying to implement a technological change in the company that's going to require some role updates or some changes, taking a couple of days in conducting workshops with cross-functional teams and giving them a little bit of insight into where you're going with things and how this is going to potentially positively impact them and their careers is a good way to approach it.
Right. So anyway, we can't emphasize that enough. Unsuccessful projects are typically technology-only projects, or I would say they may be completed successfully, but the rollout takes more budget than may have been expected.
Right, and there's always a lot of risk with those projects.
Right. And then finally, there are many ways to make transformation work for your company. If you have a certain degree of ownership of your formats and how they are, the requirements in order to get those, you have a lot of options. You can build transformations. You can take the exact same specification and have alternate sources, alternate vendors, or even send it to conversion vendor as an alternative to an automation, creating automation. So we think today we do tend to recommend that organizations maintain an awareness and a certain level of ownership of their own format.
And you want to look to align yourself with vendors and technology providers that are going to be looking after your autonomy in this whole process.
Right. So those are just a few thoughts on these subjects. So I guess we're at the questions.
Yes.
So we're hoping you enjoyed our talk. We're looking forward to hearing any questions you might have.
Sure, we do have some good ones too, and I invite others to feel free to toss a few more questions our way. Thank you very much, Mike and John. So one of the first questions we had was someone who, when you were talking about tablets, this person said small readers give this organization a number of problems, and when by small readers, they're thinking 600 by 800 pixels. They produce ebooks, and this person has been arguing that they need to give up on this size reader and focus on tablets, but is looking for some kind of data to support this. And I wanted to add one personal note on that. For the first time yesterday, I used my phone to read my book. I have the Kindle app on my phone, and I was really surprised at how enjoyable of an experience it was. I wasn't anywhere where I could use my Kindle or my iPad, so I used my phone. And sorry, but I think there are still some of us out there who use phones.
I don't think you're alone, Marianne, actually. According to the Book Industry Study Group, the number of people e-reading, or the actual revenue produced by ebooks, went from 1.1 billion last year to 2.1 billion this year, or wow. 2012, I should say. So that's a pretty significant jump, and I think that means that there are a lot of people out there who are discovering places and things that they can read on. And, by the way, it'll keep your place in your phone. And so when you go home and you want to pick up your tablet or your e-reader, you're automatically synced to the same place, right?
Yeah.
So I do that all the time.
A lot of people do use their phones in public transportation and that kind of thing.
Right.
But it's an excellent point. If you have to do work that requires a larger screen, it may be on a I don't know what that is exactly, but particularly if you're doing design, some people are actually doing design or other types of work that require a larger aspect ratio, or a larger number of pixels. So it may be that the way to go about convincing management to buy the larger tablet is to actually go along that line. I'm not sure if there's going to be.
I kind of thought the question, though, if I'm not mistaken here, I guess the question is are they asking whether they should support those formats in their conversion activities? I guess I couldn't ask the question back.
This person actually just modified and said that he's thinking about dropping the small dedicated readers. So I guess the smaller, like
from
the
his
smaller
content
version
strategy.
of the Kindle Fire. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Well, the iPad Mini, I don't know. That could be risky. But
yeah.
you know, we've found that. So I guess what a lot of publishers, especially publishers of highly designed content, have been doing and have kind of been forced to do is they've been going with sort of the fixed format type of ebooks and the fixed format layouts. I guess that one of the things that we would sort of advocate for, and we have been advocating for with our clients, is that the use of HTML5 is probably a pretty good way to be able to handle reflow in mobile devices. That's not going to adversely affect your content. I think the uphill side of that is potentially going with simpler types of layouts for particular types of content. So, you know, well, a cookbook is not something you're probably going to read on your mobile phone, but, you know, if it's black ink on paper or black ink on paper with some images, then there is a potential there to be able to handle reflow very nicely in those devices.
But if you're one of those producing fixed point layouts, we feel your pain, and we know many publishers in a similar situation. I don't know if we might be able to dig up some numbers for you if you want to get in touch.
Yeah, send us an email. We'd be happy to see if we can't come up with some stats for you.
Yeah, and this is fun. Someone also shared that on this subject that in Africa, these low-end readers or these smaller dedicated readers are becoming popular and have a huge potential. So there are other markets to consider. So another question, someone asked, what are other organizations using besides InDesign? What are you guys seeing in your practice?
Well, we're mostly are seeing InDesign actually, but we have, I think there's some experimental workflows out there. There was one that was promoted at the Tools of Change conference in New York
recently. Last week. Yep.
That is essentially an HTML approach to doing composition, which is fascinating. I think it's fairly rough. I mean, I don't know. It may be very successful within this company. We're not working directly with them right now, but it was shown as one of the alternatives that people are working on. You know, there's a lot of control that you can have with CSS3 and HTML5 that makes that potentially an interesting tool for certain types of books anyway.
I think we're going to start to see more of these types of approaches in the marketplace where there's going to be some type of an editor. So I think it's one of our clients has referred to it as a common authoring environment, you know, where you've got some sort of an editor that just allows you to more or less work on the content and then outputs to the various formats. I think we'll see a lot more of these types of approaches coming.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot more SaaS, a lot more on cloud-based. But I would say that you know, these are I would say these are leading-edge things that some companies are doing. It's not. I wouldn't say there's a movement at this point to do other things other than InDesign at this point.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
This is a nice transition to one of my favorite questions. Can you define what you mean by content management system? As we all know, that means many things to different people, but what is your definition?
I guess we should specify it a little bit more. When we say I guess we're going to have to differentiate between web content management and, let's see, centralized content management, or I don't know. We need another adjective, I think, in the industry.
Component content management too, of course, with reuse. So.
Right. Anyway, it can be a DAM. It can be an actual, you know, labeled as a DAM. It can be a content management system. But it's a type that we that is essentially maintaining your core formats and possibly your distribution formats as well, and your work in progress formats.
And it should have the ability to have some type of workflow, some ability to search.
Yeah, it can be a repository that you're going to pool all of the content that exists and that you are creating, in which you will search internally in order to find content that you want to use in new products and so forth. But it's typically something that does not have a directly in our terminology anyway, doesn't have a web specific component, although it may distribute to the web or to a web CMS. And if that's sort of the gist of the question.
All right. Someone asked, how can data be structured within InDesign without greatly changing how designers work? How can structured XML be derived from InDesign without relying on conversion companies to create that XML from scratch?
Well, we've spent a lot of time working on that problem over the years.
We've developed some methods and some best practices around that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I guess the best practices for InDesign, and that is using paragraph and character styles, which is typically how you would do that, gets you partway there. But there are a few more techniques. For example, in InDesign, you have to order your content as well as structure your content. I don't want to get too much detail, but there are a number of techniques and that minimize what people have to do.
Yeah, we frequently will offer workshops in best practices in InDesign to bring people up to speed on the ability.
But as we said before, this is something there are some vendor technologies out there. You can custom create technologies, but there is definitely a people component to this. And designers may or may not be happy for the initial period when they have to start using best practices, as well as perhaps some other techniques. But in the end, it's extremely effective.
We've actually had groups of folks, say in the beginning, you're creating more work for me. This isn't going to allow me to be creative. But after they've been doing it for as little as a week, you start to hear things like, "Wow, I never realized I could, do this."
All right.
Or I can take something and put it in here.
I think a week is up.
Make it into the web. Right?
I'm going to say a week.
All right. All right.
But I would say
about things they can do.
It's really about seeing the need to do it, right? So we have some friends who have people actually producing ebooks at the same time as producing print pages, and they certainly see the need to have more structure in their content to start with, and these are editors,
right?
And so if the designers are working across and are aware of what happens downstream, perhaps working in both places, and this is an organizational issue, right? There is a lot more motivation to do things to actually provide the structuring upstream and to make some changes. So anyway, there's a lot to that question. So maybe I should leave it there for now.
And I, of course, would also recommend research into the Data for Publishers standard that you referenced earlier.
Right.
Here's a question from someone who publishes printed education materials in the form of flashcards with pictures. And embarking into a digital format, there's concern that the pictures would be passed from computer to computer or printed out, and wanted your thoughts on that.
Security, right? That is a good textbook question from time immemorial, right? Even back to photocopying, but now obviously more fear.
Thinking that exactly.
And there are people who come at it from two different ways, right? So one school of thought says, put your logos all over it and turn it into an advertisement because they're going to do it no matter what you do. You know, I mean, kids are not concerned about people photocopying their books, right? You know, I think we've all done that. They are. But you know, it's in the digital format. It seems to be the idea is that it's easier in digital. And then on the other side, you know, there's the whole DRM community, and there are a couple of different ways of approaching that. You know, you could do social DRM, which identifies the content as having originated with you, and you know, if you can track it down, then you know, good, you can do something about it. But most of the time, organized thievery of content is something that you're just not going to be able to stop. And if it's casual, you know, it's just one of those things that I don't know. I don't think there's an easy way just yet.
Right.
Yeah. So I want to interject quickly that if we don't get through all of these questions, which doesn't look like we're going to, we will respond individually, following up after the webinar. And Mike and John are also publishing a white paper on this topic, and everyone who's registered will receive a copy of that in the coming weeks. So someone had a great question here on the concept of adaptive content. NPR, they cite NPR, and their cutting edge API as a great site that uses adaptive content. And they wondered if you could speak to any others who are leading this area. I know that BBC Sports is doing this, and the BBC did this with their Olympic website coverage as well.
Right. This is something that we're starting to see actually a great deal more of, and it's, you know, sort of these other media outlets that are used to using these APIs and used to getting content very quickly are starting to look to the publishing community to be able to, you know, license and access some of their content. And excuse me, we have publishers who are moving right now to be able to make that a reality. But I think that most of the publishers that we see are still sort of kind of trapped in that old print mode, and they're not really looking too far outside of their organizations to these types of opportunities.
Right. Well, they're on the horizon, but they're not front in a lot of the big publishers, actually. So.
Right. But that's a great question. You know, I personally, I think that these APIs and the ability to feed particular types of XML to potential licensees is going to be very big in the coming years.
And automated too.
And automated, absolutely.
Right. Okay, I think this is going to be our last question here, but it's from a small publishing nonprofit organization publishing department, and they've been producing XML on their books for over 10 years. They are converting the XML to EPUB and MOBI through vendors, but the conversions take a long time and always has a lot of errors. So they're asking for some recommendations or best practices for speeding this up. Maybe Linda would like to answer this one. Yes.
Making it more accurate. Well,
there are ways to do that.
First of all, go with a better conversion vendor. and potentially moving some of your QA in-house. It sounds like you already have to do QA anyway. So there are two potential approaches for you there. Feel free to follow up with us on an email.
Great. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. Linda at Data Conversion Laboratory, thank you. We are 1 minute over. There are a number of questions that we haven't gotten to, but I know that between the three of us, that is RSI Content Solutions, DCL,